The late 20th century was an awkward yet memorable point in Western pop culture history. If I mention boy bands, frosted tips, or the dot-com craze, then you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. But I've got a different late 90s trend in mind, and it's one that you might be a little less familiar with: the sport of robot combat. Born on a hotel carpet in 1987, the sport of robot combat would quickly gain popularity amongst engineers and spectators alike. The concept is simple: weaponized robots duel to the death, and the last bot standing wins. It's only natural that these battles would eventually become popular televised events. Gladiator fights have been banned for centuries after all, and who doesn't love a good old-fashioned blood sport? Breaking into the mainstream with the BBC's 1998 smash hit Robot Wars, combat robot competitions would quickly become staples on both British and American TV listings. And what would a hit TV show be without a slew of tie-in games, especially in the early 2000s? Unfortunately, most of these games were rather underwhelming, to say the least. Considering that the real-life sport has a pretty high bar to entry, fans were left wanting for a way to build and battle bots at home. But this demand would soon be met, thanks to an unlikely contender: a low-budget game developer with a history of making edutainment games. Developer Gabriel Interactive would release Robot Arena Design and Destroy in February 2003 to positive critical acclaim. Despite the game's bargain bin price, players were captivated by realistic physics, fully simulated destruction, and an in-depth robot building system. Robot Arena was miles better than the officially licensed Robot Wars titles, leading it to sell far more copies than publisher Infogrames ever expected. It was so good, in fact, that it still has an active following to this day, with more than a dozen tournament events being hosted each year. I knew this game was special, even back when I was a kid. It had no right sharing shelf space with the other shovelware crap you'd find for $20. Me and my siblings would spend hundreds of hours building the wildest bots we could imagine, battling them on local multiplayer for bragging rights. Simpler times. But I've had a bit of an itch for design and destruction recently, and 21 years later, this game is still regarded as the greatest robot combat game of all time. So, lower your resolution and turn on XP compatibility mode, because it's time for another retro review. Being as old as it is, you would think that there would be some difficulties getting Robot Arena to run on modern hardware. Luckily, this isn't really the case, and the game works pretty much right out of the box on Windows 10 and 11. The biggest issues I encountered were all caused by playing the game at too high of a resolution. As long as you stick to an era-appropriate 4:3 aspect ratio, you should be fine. As soon as I launched the game and the theme song started playing, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia. I don't think they could have made a better fitting soundtrack than this. The main menu consists of two gameplay choices: Exhibition or Team HQ. The Exhibition mode allows you to quickly hop into a battle, either against other players sharing your computer or AI-controlled opponents. There are 5 different game modes to choose from, although 3 of them are just variations of deathmatch. With a maximum of 4 robots per match, battles are fast-paced and chaotic. The game has an impressive 12 maps, which is more than some of the modern Call of Duty games, although some of them are restricted to the King of the Hill or tabletop game modes. Each map has a distinct set of hazards, including trapdoors, saw blades, and spikes. Understanding and taking advantage of each map's hazard layout will be important if you want to succeed in the long run. Loading up an exhibition match, we then choose both our robot as well as our enemy's robots. These enemy designs are divided into 15 different teams, each with a distinct theme and aesthetic. Some examples include the samurai-themed Team Dragon, the frosty North Polars, or the stereotypical American Good Ol' Boys. You can really tell that the developers had a ton of fun designing the pre-made bots and teams, with each of them having unique artwork, decals, and flavor text. After selecting our choice of robots, we can jump into the arena for our introductory match. Controlling your bot is simple, and all of the default robots use WASD to move and space to attack. Performing actions such as damaging enemies or standing on the hill will award you with points. Once the timer runs out, whichever team has the most points wins the match. Robot Arena's physics are powered by the widely used Havoc engine, which allows for bots to interact realistically with their environment. Heavier robots can push lighter robots, and an impact could cause a part to break off and go flying across the arena. But this isn't to say the physics are perfect, of course. Occasional unexpected behavior can happen, especially with some of the more extreme robot designs, but honestly, this just adds to the charm. In conjunction with the physics engine, Robot Arena employs simple yet convincing tricks to simulate the real damage that combat robots would sustain. Each robot is composed from a combination of a chassis and attachable parts. If enough force is applied to a part, such as a wheel or a hammer, that part could snap off entirely. Additionally, blunt weapon impacts will deform the chassis mesh, exposing the internal parts of the robot. With an open wound, you're at risk for damage to your internal organs, and a well-placed strike to your CPU could result in your entire robot being immobilized in one hit. This level of simulation and destruction was unparalleled for 2003, and it's still impressive to this day. Understandably, however, this focus on realism resulted in below-average graphical and audio fidelity for the time. I don't think it's an issue, personally, because the game doesn't really look or sound all that bad. Graphically, it's a fully 3D game. The system requirements weren't too high for the time, and the average mid-range PC had no issues running the game at a stable frame rate. This was a bargain bin game after all, so I don't think anyone expected it to have cutting-edge graphics. More importantly, the game has a consistent and clear art style that communicates exactly what is happening. Particle effects are limited, but the floating colored numbers show exactly when you're taking or receiving damage. Besides, you don't really need particle effects to highlight the damage when you're literally leaving behind a wake of destruction. By the end of the match, the arena will be littered with the detached limbs of your enemies, a visceral display of carnage. Robot Arena's map design is based in reality, with each arena feeling like something you might actually see on an episode of BattleBots. None of them feel copy-pasted, and they even have little pieces of flavor text to go along with them. This use of flavor text is seen all throughout the game, and it adds a charm and sense of passion that goes quite a long way. For something that's often overlooked, some of these are actually pretty funny. I'm not so sure why, but for me, these little text blurbs are the most nostalgic aspects of the game. But perhaps even more memorable are the cheesy stock sound effects. It's a trademark of these early 2000s budget titles, and while they are probably perceived as lazy at the time, in hindsight, they just add to the nostalgia factor. Matches feature an enthusiastic announcer with dialogue lines specific to each of the game's maps. The introductory spiel the announcer gives describing the features of each map really adds to the late-night cable TV vibe of the game.
Enter the Metal Skull Arena. Only the most worthy of bots return unscathed from this arena. Pain awaits those bots with the misfortune of falling into the death pit. You can feel the tension between the opposing robots as we begin tonight's match.
Spectators in the crowd will also chant and cheer, reacting to the action of the battle, and if the robots aren't exciting enough, they'll even boo. I can't talk about Robot Arena without mentioning its fantastic soundtrack. While the game may only have 3 tracks, all of them are bangers, and if you ever get sick of them, well, just add your own music. Simply drag and drop an MP3 file into the game's music folder, and it'll be added to the soundtrack. Taking a step back from the exhibition game mode, let's take a look at our only other choice on the main menu, besides options. The Team HQ menu allows you to create your very own combat robotics team, competing in a variety of tournament events to win prizes. This is also where you'll access Robot Arena's Spotlight feature, the Robot Workshop. Robot Arena's custom bot creation suite falls just short of being perfect, but the minor annoyances don't ruin the overall experience. The flexibility offered by this tool allows for a staggering level of freedom when building a robot. Each build begins with a custom robot baseplate. If you're not a fan of the preset geometric shapes, take up the freeform drawing tool to create a custom chassis tailored to your needs. This two-dimensional shape will then be extruded to a 3D one with adjustable height. You even have the ability to move the vertices on the top of the mesh, adding additional complexity to your shape. After finalizing your robot's form, you can choose between one of 4 materials, varying in weight and durability. Managing your robot's weight is an integral part of the design process, as heavier robots will fall into different weight classes, limiting their ability to participate in certain events. The Components tab is probably where you'll spend most of your time in this tool. The only required component is a CPU CPU, which serves as the brain of your robot. If this gets destroyed, your robot will be disabled, so it's a good idea to protect it in the center of your bot. Other than that, you have complete freedom to build whatever bot you can imagine. In total, there are 73 components in the base game. Some examples include batteries, motors, hydraulic pistons, maces, axes, and even taxidermied bear paws. An eclectic bunch, but it feels exactly like what you'd see real-life battle bots made out of. A sort of scrapyard Frankenstein, you could say. Unfortunately, the actual process of assembling your robot is rather cumbersome. There is a grid on your robot's base plate, but there's no snapping feature. But depending on the shape of your robot, the grid will sometimes appear off-center, making it sort of pointless. Parts can be placed either directly on the base plate or raised by holding the control key. This allows you to stuff your bot to the seams with as many components as possible, so long as they don't intersect. When trying to optimize your component placement, you'll probably encounter a pretty big annoyance. If you need to make your chassis a little bit taller or wider to account for more parts, then you'll need to go back to the first step of the builder. This clears all of your progress, so you definitely want to make sure that your bot has the right shape before you start adding components. But other than that, the bot builder works well enough to get the job done. This tool alone adds dozens of hours of replayability, and I'm only scratching the surface with this thing. There's a myriad of advanced concepts and glitches you can exploit to build some seriously impressive bots. And if you plan on playing online, well, you're going to need to master this tool if you want to stand a chance. After you've settled on a robot design, you'll be asked to wire your robot. Keyboard keys or gamepad inputs can be assigned to components, such as motors or pistons. The most important and final step in the robot building process is to paint your creation. You can paint, texture, and even edge your bot however you like. If you're feeling extra creative, you can export a paint template to get a UV map of your robot's mesh. You can then open this up in an editing software to create a true work of art. You can also add decals, which include custom bitmap images. I bet you guys can already guess which picture I'll use. Once you're satisfied with your bot's styling, it's a good idea to give it a try in the test arena. You can also spawn items here to test how your bot interacts with the physics engine. I've decided to build 3 different robots, one for each weight class: John Cylinder, John Hammer, and John Cube. For our lightweight bot, I chose to create this unicycle with a flipper. The idea here is that my lightweight and maneuverability will allow me to toss my enemies off the stage without getting hurt myself. Needless to say, that didn't quite work as I had planned. Once I entered the Robot Games tournament, I quickly realized that I had forgotten to wire the ability to turn. When you've entered a tournament, you can't make any changes to your bot until it's over, so I thought I was screwed. Luckily, our first opponent's robot is even more useless than mine, and I'm somehow able to flip them upside down, disqualifying them due to immobility. After each match of a tournament, you have the opportunity to repair your bot. Depending on how damaged the part is, it'll take more time to repair it. You have a budget of 30 minutes to spend on repairs, but if a part is completely destroyed, it'll take 20 minutes to fix. This makes it really difficult to proceed in a tournament if a key part like a wheel or weapon gets destroyed. Since your enemies don't have to abide by this rule, you'll enter the next battle at a pretty significant disadvantage. This makes robots with as few external parts as possible a lot more viable than some of the more complex designs, since you'll have less to repair. Once the John cylinder was all fixed, I could proceed to the next round. Again, my opponent is a rather poorly designed robot with a saw blade that can't even reach me. But thanks to my broken flipper and inability to turn, this becomes a stalemate. Forced into a corner, I have no choice but to surrender, since my opponent would have won through having more points than me. Outside of simply destroying the enemy robot, a winner may be determined by how many points they gained during a match. Points are given based on how much damage you do to an enemy. This allows for a very cheesy hit-and-run strategy. Theoretically, you could win just by hitting the enemy once to get a few points and then running away until the clock runs out. But even this won't help our sad cylinder, so I tap out and head back to the drawing board.
This match is done.
With properly assigned controls and a lighter flipper, I hoped my bot would fare a bit better. Of course, I forgot to account for an obvious design flaw: my cylindrical shape. When flipped, my bot becomes perfectly balanced on its side. Another loss. Walking away without as much as a single win, I'm offered a consolation prize on the results screen. Well, you lost the first match. All participants get the Biggie Value Meal. The ability to unleash your rage on this crappy prize you get for losing is always entertaining. I'm not sure what's happening with the banner in the background though. It's supposed to show your team logo. I think that the image I used was so high resolution it caused the game to just glitch out and show the entire texture atlas instead. Up next, I've created the John Hammer. This machine is built for speed, and with a lightweight and high-powered motors, it's almost too fast to control. The bot is so speedy, in fact, that John Hammer's focal feature fails to add any value. Why bother smashing my enemies and risking breaking the hammer when I could simply shove them off the map? Unfortunately, my extreme speed exacerbates an already frustrating problem with Robot Arena: the camera. While you have a few different camera angles to choose from using the function keys, none of them do a particularly good job of tracking your robot. The camera will frequently get stuck or lost when trying one of the auto tracking modes, so you might just be best off getting used to using the static camera. It's definitely not a game-breaking issue, but it's a minor gripe. Nobody stands a chance against John Hammer, and I'm able to win every match either by outrunning my enemies or through pushing them off the edge. In general, the AI bots are pretty competent. They have a tendency to favor attacking the player though, so even in a free-for-all, you'll sometimes find all three enemies ganging up on you. They make a decent attempt to avoid hazards, and they're able to push you off the edge. Most impressively, perhaps, is how they understand when you're immobile. If an AI manages to flip you over, they'll stop doing anything so that they don't accidentally save you. Then they just sit and watch until your inevitable disqualification. But just like most games, there's a way to exploit the AI to your advantage. Since they tend to drive in a straight line, a battering ram type bot finds great success. After taking first place in the Toledo Robots Club tournament, I decided to try and run it back in the Robotic Terror Zone. This tournament takes place on a map using the King of the Hill rules. In this mode, points are awarded every second to whoever is inside the center of the map. Whoever has the most points when the time runs out wins. But I always hated this game mode since it just devolves into complete chaos, and it's tough to win without getting lucky. But what if we change John Hammer into John Plow? Well, we see even more success. I'm still susceptible to being flipped over, but I'm typically able to cause significant damage purely by high-speed ramming. At this point, I'm having so much fun trying out different builds and strategies that I forgot I was supposed to be playing this game for a video. I ended up spending 3 hours just making tweaks to my bots. Anyway, with one successful bot and the other destined for the trash heap, it's time to bring out my third and most secret weapon, the John Cube. This atrocious amalgamation contains as many blades as I could possibly fit. It may not have wheels and it damages itself every time it moves, but it sure does look menacing. But just because you can build something like this doesn't exactly mean you should. It does terribly in the tournament, since by the end of the first match, I've sustained so much damage that I'll never have enough time to fix it all. And with all three of my robots having challenged the arena, only one was truly successful. This is where the infinitely replayable gameplay loop of Robot Arena continues. Build robots, enter a tournament, and see if you win. Winning enough tournaments in a season will grant you the Golden Saw Blade, but it's just for show. There are no unlocks, achievements, or aspects of progression in Robot Arena. You just keep playing until you get bored. But thanks to the easy-to-mod nature of the game, we don't have to get bored. Aside from a whole slew of mods adding new maps and robot parts, there are a few popular total conversion mods. These are complete overhauls of the game, adding hundreds of new weapons, fixing glitches, improving graphics, and adding new sounds. The most popular total conversion mod, known as DSL, is where a majority of the player base can be found today. However, you're probably not going to find anyone else online unless you join an organized tournament. These are hosted a few times a month by members of the Game Tech Mods forum and associated Discord server. But there's something far more important that I've been meaning to tell you. I've actually been lying about something. Robot Arena Design and Destroy is most commonly known by the name Robot Arena 2. That's right, this is actually a sequel. I wouldn't blame you if you had never played or even heard of the original Robot Arena though. The first game was a bit of an urban legend as a kid, and nobody I knew had ever even seen the game in real life. Robot Arena 1 was a complete failure of a game, to say the least. Not only did it sell poorly, it was heavily criticized by reviewers for a litany of issues. IGN gave the game a 4.3, which is surprisingly a higher score than they gave Gollum. But we got some time, so let's give it a try. The original Robot Arena released as a PC exclusive in 2001, and it was also developed by Gabriel Interactive and published by Infogrames. And I have to say, IGN was right. This game sucks. It's honestly really sad just how terrible this game is. Robot customization is limited to simply dragging and dropping parts onto fixed points on one of the available chassis. Additionally, parts cost money, both to purchase and to repair, so you're limited on what you're able to build. But let me tell you a secret. You won't actually need to worry about building an optimal robot. All you'll need to win is a battering ram, wheels, and a battery. This is because, as it would seem, the developers forgot to program AI for the enemy robots. The game features a career mode where you challenge a gauntlet of 7 different AI enemies for cash prizes. But with AI so brain dead it can barely move, it's impossible to lose. The battering ram only requires you to lightly tap the enemy to deal damage, so all you need to do is just back up a little bit and then ram into them on repeat until they explode. How did this game even get released in such a terrible state? This is legitimately a good contender for the worst game of all time. I managed to beat the entire thing in just 17 minutes, while simultaneously playing a different game on my phone. You don't even have to look at the screen to win. It's really a shame that this game is so bad, because you can tell that the developers were really passionate about the concept. Even the sound design and graphics aren't half bad for a game from 2001. But there's really no point in playing this game. Aside from the non-existent AI, the collision detection is entirely broken. This results in you getting stuck inside of enemies constantly, or even worse, sometimes thousands of collisions will occur on the same frame. This causes the game to slow down to a halt. There is also no physics engine, so your bots are restricted to moving on flat ground at a snail's pace. This sucks. So, it's been over 20 years since the last installment to the Robot Arena series, and BattleBots have mostly fallen out of popular culture. Will we ever see a revival of this franchise? Who knows, but maybe one day. Wait a minute, what's this? There's a Robot Arena 3? And it came out in 2016? Why have I never heard of this? Well, it stands to reason that this game must not be very good, considering the overwhelmingly negative reviews on Steam. It looks like the developers dumped this game into early access 8 years ago, never fixed any issues, and then fell off the face of the earth. Sounds like my type of game. Jesus, this game is loud. Already off to a good start. After creating my team, I head into the exhibition mode to test out the game's controls. Oh boy, I don't even know where to start. First of all, the physics are absolute trash. This tiny robot has the ability to send robots twice its size flying 60 feet into the air. Motors seem to have far too much torque, and no matter how careful you are, you can easily flip yourself over just driving in a straight line. Sometimes you'll just randomly glitch out and go flying for no reason at all. And worst of all, the robots feel weightless, and there's no impact felt with any action. How does a game released 8 years ago feel 20 times worse than one over twice its age? The graphics aren't very good either. All the particle effects are basic and lazy, and the models are low poly enough that you'd think they ported them directly from RA2. There's also no distinction between your own and enemy score numbers, which is a downgrade from the green and red numbers that the previous title had. Aside from that, the UI is confusing and ugly. For some reason, the tournament mode randomly shows Xbox buttons, even when you have no controller plugged in. But this whole tournament mode is hardly functional anyway. When you enter a tournament, your bot is locked into that event until it's over. But sometimes, the tournament just never ends, even if you lose, and trying to re-enter it does nothing at all. The game has eaten your bot, and there is no way to get it back, save from reinstalling the game, I assume. The AI in this game might be even worse than in the first game. Sometimes they seem to forget how to move entirely and disqualify themselves by standing still. When they are moving, they just drive in a straight line towards you, even if there's something in the way. The maps are all lazy, basic rectangles with random objects thrown about. Either that, or they're direct remakes of RA2 maps. Except they can't even get that right, because the Springtop Arena, which is notorious for its crazy tilting battleground, doesn't even move. The announcer even says keeping your balance is key to surviving, so they just forgot to add the tilting aspect. I guess the ability to see from your robot's point of view using a mounted camera is pretty cool, but that's probably the only positive thing I have to say about this game. Most of the game's sound effects seem to be ripped directly from RA2. The enthusiastic announcer has been replaced with some dude who sounds like he's falling asleep in the booth.
Watch out that you don't fall through the hole in the middle of the floor. These bots mean business tonight.
Plus, the mixing is all over the place, with sounds varying wildly in volume. I found the music to be quite annoying, as it has none of the charm that the original game's music had. RA2 had tracks that implemented wrench, drill, and clanging metal sounds, really fitting the game's theme. The music for RA3, on the other hand, sounds like it came from a royalty-free music pack the devs got on a Black Friday special. Okay, so we already know the gameplay sucks, but will the Bot Lab offer any redemption? Due to a lack of instructions or tutorial, using this tool will be difficult. You can draw and extrude your chassis, similar to the second game, but now you're able to adjust multiple levels of your extrusion. However, the way that this is done is in a strange and unintuitive way, and it's really hard to see exactly what you're moving. Once you've picked a chassis, you can pick an armor type, then you proceed to add components. It's very similar to the second game. So similar, in fact, that 80% of these parts seem to be reused. While there is functioning grid snapping, this weird blue shading your chassis has makes it pretty difficult to tell where exactly you're placing parts. The new move and rotate buttons make it easier to line parts up, but there's no hotkeys for these, so you'll have to click on them. But above all else, the biggest issue with the Bot Lab in Robot Arena 3 is its reckless abandon for all logic. You can place parts anywhere you want, including inside other parts or on the floor outside of the bot. Want to attach 96 chainsaws inside of each other? Sure, why not? Without any collision or weight limit, you're no longer required to abide by any limitations. This removes every aspect of strategy that went into robot building. Why make a bigger chassis to hold more batteries when you can just place 15 batteries in the same space? This game was made by clowns. Motors are far too powerful, and you'll need to turn the torque and RPM all the way down if you want to be able to control your robot at all. And even then, you're still at the mercy of the game's demented physics engine. Perhaps the most glaring issue is that they forgot to make the CPU a required component. The CPU component exists, and the description says you must place this inside of your robot, but that's a lie. It does nothing, and you don't need to use it at all. Anyway, I threw an ungodly amount of chainsaws on the front of my robot and called it a day. Let's see how we do. Yeah, my motors are so powerful, I can barely even control myself. This is not fun. But the game does fall into the category of games that are so bad they're funny, so I'll give them that. But besides as a joke, there's no reason you should spend $20 on this game. I'd even go as far as to say it's a scam. In May 2016, the developers released the game into early access on Steam. It was very rough and clearly unfinished, but fans had hope as they had been waiting years for a sequel to RA2. 1 month later, in June, the developers would release a series of 3 patches containing minor bug fixes, each one a few days after the last. Then, after less than 30 days in early access, the developers would announce that the game would be launching into full release. Their reasoning, as explained in a community post, was to capitalize on the extra visibility of being a newly released game during the Steam summer sale. The developers would post one more time a few months later, informing the community that they're hard at work improving the game. This was the last communication ever provided from the team, and since 2016, the game has never seen another update, making it effectively abandoned. While Gabriel Interactive may have destroyed what reputation they had with the disgusting state of Robot Arena 3, their magnum opus still lives on. Robot combat has always been a very niche genre of games, and unfortunately, a majority of the available titles are just plain bad. However, there may be a light at the end of this dark tunnel. A small indie team began work on a spiritual successor to Robot Arena in 2017 with a game called Robot Rumble 2. While I haven't played the game yet myself, it has a decently large fan base and receives updates on a regular basis. Plus, it's free on itch.io, so I'll definitely give it a try in the future. But until Robot Rumble 2 releases a full version of the game, I think it's safe to say that Robot Arena 2 is still the greatest combat robotics simulator of all time. There's no beating the unabashed simplicity of the game, and despite a few minor flaws, it's held up wonderfully. And that's without discussing the total conversion mods, which are so large they might as well be new games entirely. Robot Arena 2 is absolutely worth a try if you've never played it before, and I highly recommend it. I'm John, and this has been another one of my retro reviews. As always, I want to give a huge shout out to the loyal members of the Bag Holders Club. Thank you for your continued support through monthly donations. 2024 has been a record year for Jauntcoin already, with a staggering 900,000% gain in the past 5 days. We are now just 99.8% down from our all-time high. Keep on holding, because we'll definitely moon as soon as the John Metaverse releases in 2029. Goodbye.